The moment he opened the door, the scent of dried lavender and beeswax stopped him cold. For 5 years, this wing of the house had been sealed, the furniture draped in white shrouds, the air thick with the dust of abandonment. He was Lord Alaric Volkov, master of a dozen estates just like this one, a man whose heart was rumored to be as cold and empty as the halls he now walked. She was Tamsin, a dismissed lady's maid, a woman so quiet and overlooked that the solicitors liquidating the property had forgotten she even existed. The house was meant to be a tomb, a memory he was finally burying. But what no one knew was that behind this one door, a single flame of devotion had been kept alive in the darkness. And for the first time in a century, the ancient grief in his chest felt a flicker of warmth. If you believe that the quietest acts of love are the ones that echo the loudest, type devotion below. And let me tell you what happened next. To understand how she got there, you need to know about the day the world ended for Tamsin. It wasn't a grand, earth-shattering event. It was the simple, quiet closing of a bedroom door. Lady Elspeth, her mistress, had passed in her sleep, as peacefully as the falling of a single autumn leaf. For 20 years, Tamsin had been her shadow, her confidant, her hands. She knew the precise way her mistress liked her tea, the exact fold for her linens, the scent of rosewater that soothed her headaches. Tamsin's world had been the quiet rhythm of this service, a life of purpose found in the care of another. When the lady's son, the formidable and distant Lord Alaric, arrived, he moved through the house like a wraith. He was a tall, severe man, with eyes the color of a stormy sky and a stillness that was unnerving. He spoke few words, issued his orders through his secretaries, and the grief he must have felt was locked behind a mask of cold granite. The staff whispered about him. They said the air grew cold when he entered a room. They said the candles flickered and dimmed in his presence, even when there was no draught. They said his shadow sometimes seemed to linger a moment after he had moved. Tamsin paid them no mind. She only saw a son who had lost his mother. The orders were swift and brutal. The house was to be closed. The staff dismissed with a generous severance. The property sold. Tamsin was given her papers and a purse of coins by a solicitor who never once met her eye. She was 38 years old, with no family and nowhere to go. Her life's work had been erased in an afternoon, so she did the only thing she could think to do. She hid. The estate was vast, with forgotten cottages and abandoned groundskeepers' sheds. She found a small, dry room in what was once the aviary, and she made it her own. She had saved a little, and the village was a long walk, but she was frugal. She became a ghost on the grounds of a ghost house, but she did not abandon her post. Every day, while the house slept under its dusty shrouds, Tamsin would slip inside through a loose cellar window. She had kept one key, the key to Lady Elspeth's chambers. And every day, she would enter that silent suite of rooms and care for them as if her mistress were merely away on a short trip. She dusted the polished mahogany of the vanity. She aired the linens, keeping them smelling of lavender. She polished the silver-backed brushes and wound the delicate porcelain clock on the mantelpiece. She tended to the pressed flowers in their frames and ensured the books on the nightstand were free of dust. She did it not for payment or for thanks, but because it was a promise. A silent promise to the only person who had ever truly seen her. Lady Elspeth had been kind. She had seen the intelligence in Tamsin's eyes, the quiet competence in her hands. She had taught Tamsin to read beyond simple letters, sharing her own books of history and botany. "You have a curator's soul, Tamsin," she had said once, her voice thin but warm. "You preserve what is precious." And so Tamsin preserved, For 5 years, she was the secret keeper of this sanctuary, a lone vestal tending a forgotten flame. The day the solicitors returned with Lord Alaric for the final inspection, Tamsin was caught. She had been polishing a small silver locket on the dressing table when she heard the heavy, deliberate footsteps in the corridor. Panic seized her. She was a trespasser, a squatter. They would have her arrested. She froze, dustcloth in hand, as the ornate brass handle turned. The door swung inward, flooding the dim room with the gray light of the hallway. And there he stood. Lord Alaric Volkov. He was just as she remembered, only more so. The severity in his face had deepened, carved by time into something ancient and unreadable. The air in the hallway seemed to rush into the room, carrying a profound chill that had nothing to do with the weather. Behind him stood two portly solicitors, their faces a mixture of impatience and greed. One of them began to speak, his voice oily. "My lord, as you can see, this wing has been sealed as per your instructions." His voice trailed off as he too took in the scene. The room was not shrouded. It was not dead. It was alive with care. The sunlight, muted by the old glass, caught the gleam of polished wood and the soft sheen of clean linen. The air smelled not of dust and decay, but of lavender, beeswax, and old paper. It smelled of life. It smelled of his mother. Lord Alaric's gaze swept over the room, his stormy eyes missing nothing. The perfectly plumped pillows on the bed, the open book on the reading chair, a silk ribbon marking the page, the small vase of dried hydrangeas on the windowsill. And finally, his eyes landed on Tamsin. She stood by the vanity, a small, still figure in a simple gray dress, her face pale with terror. She expected him to shout, to call the guards, to cast her out into the cold. The solicitors found their voices. "What is the meaning of this? Who is this woman? The house was to be emptied." Lord Alaric raised a single hand, and the men fell silent as if their throats had been squeezed shut. He took a step into the room, and another. His movements were unnaturally smooth, a predator's grace. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to deepen, to stretch towards him. He stopped before the mantelpiece, his gloved fingers tracing the edge of the porcelain clock. It was ticking, softly, steadily. He turned his head slowly, his gaze pinning Tamsin to the spot. It was not a look of anger. It was one of profound, searching intensity. His voice, when he finally spoke, was a low rumble, like stones shifting deep underground. "You did this," he stated. It was not a question. Tamsin could only nod, her heart hammering against her ribs. She braced herself for the inevitable dismissal. He looked around the room again, a long, slow survey. He saw the worn patch on the rug where she must have knelt to tend the fire that was never lit. He saw the careful arrangement of the perfume bottles, exactly as his mother had kept them. He saw not just cleanliness, but reverence. He turned back to her. His eyes, for a fleeting second, seemed to flash with a dim, crimson light. "They told me she was gone," he said, his voice softer now, laced with a strange, melancholic wonder. "But you kept her." The two words hung in the air, resonating with a truth so deep it made Tamsin's breath catch. He didn't see a trespasser. He didn't see a disobedient servant. He saw the keeper of his mother's soul. He saw the love she had poured into these silent, forgotten rooms. For the first time in 5 years, Tamsin felt seen. He turned to the sputtering solicitors. His voice was no longer soft. It was iron. "The sale is cancelled. Leave. Now." They stared, mouths agape. "But my lord, the contracts are drawn. The buyers are—" "I said now," he repeated, and this time the cold in the room was a palpable force. The flames in the hallway sconces seemed to shrink away from the doorway. The men practically stumbled over each other in their haste to obey, scurrying away like frightened rats. Silence descended, heavy and absolute. It was just the two of them now, in the room that Tamsin had preserved. Lord Alaric walked slowly towards her. She stood her ground, though every instinct screamed at her to flee. He stopped a few feet away. "What is your name?" "Tamsin, my lord." Her voice was a whisper. "Tamsin," he repeated, the name a strange and ancient sound on his tongue. "You were my mother's maid." "Yes, my lord." "And you have remained here for 5 years. Why?" She finally found the courage to meet his gaze directly. "I made a promise," she said simply, "to care for her things. She was very kind to me." An expression Tamsin couldn't decipher flickered across his face. It was something older than grief, something more complex than gratitude. It was recognition. "Pack your belongings," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Whatever you have, you are coming with me." To where, my lord?" "To my home, to Blackwood Manor. You have a new position." He gestured to the room around them. "You will continue your work. You will be the curator of this memory. For me." And so Tamsin's life changed for the second time with the closing of a door. She left the crumbling aviary and the lonely estate, not as a dismissed servant, but as a valued something. She wasn't sure what. She rode in a carriage finer than any she had ever seen, its interior lined with dark velvet, the horses black as night. Lord Alaric sat opposite her, silent and imposing, the landscape blurring past the windows. Blackwood Manor was not a house. It was a fortress of Gothic imagination, all sharp spires and dark stone, clinging to the side of a mountain like a roosting hawk. It loomed against the bruised twilight sky, its windows like watchful eyes. As they passed through the immense iron gates, Tamsin felt a shiver of unease. This was a place of power, of ancient secrets. The whispers of the staff at the old house came back to her. The cold, the shadows, the stillness. She was shown to a suite of rooms larger than the entire cottage she had hidden in. They were comfortable, furnished with dark, heavy wood and rich fabrics, a fire already crackling in the hearth. A young maid, nervous and wide-eyed, informed her that Lord Alaric would request her presence in the library after she had settled. The library was breathtaking. It soared 3 stories high, a cathedral of books with spiral staircases winding up into the shadows. A massive fireplace dominated one wall, its flames casting dancing light on thousands of leather-bound spines. And in the center of it all, standing before the fire, was Lord Alaric. He turned as she entered. "Tamsin, come." She approached cautiously. The room was warmer than the rest of the manor, yet the familiar chill still clung to the air around him. The shadows cast by the fire seemed deeper near his feet, pooling like spilled ink. "I have not been entirely truthful with you," he began, his voice low. "Your new position is more than simply tending to a memory." He gestured to a large table where several heavy leather-bound tomes lay open. They were not modern books. The script was archaic, the illustrations strange and unsettling. "My mother was not just a noblewoman. She was a historian, a scholar. She was the keeper of our lineage's lore." He paused, his gaze intense. the rooms you cared for. They were not just her chambers. They were her archive. Tamsin's mind reeled. She thought of the countless books she had dusted, the rolled maps she had carefully preserved, the journals filled with her mistress's elegant script that she had never dared to read. She had thought them hobbies, the gentle pursuits of a lady of leisure. "An archive of what, my lord?" she asked, her voice barely audible. He gave her a long, searching look, as if weighing her capacity for the truth. "Of my kind," he said at last. "Of the history, the laws, and the enemies of the family Volkov." The unspoken words hung in the air between them. My kind. Tamsin felt a cold dread mix with a sudden, shocking understanding. The chill that followed him, the unnatural stillness, the way his eyes seemed to glow in the dim light, the way the very shadows seemed to obey him. He was not merely a reclusive lord. He was something else, something ancient and dangerous. "I need your help," he continued, his voice pulling her from her spiraling thoughts. "My mother was searching for something before she died. A piece of lost history, a counterspell, a forgotten treaty, something vital. It is hidden somewhere in her research, within her unique system of cataloging and cross-referencing, a system only she understood." He looked at her, and for the first time she saw a crack in his granite facade. She saw a flicker of something that looked like desperation. "But you understand it," he said, his voice a low murmur. "You must. You spent 20 years by her side. You tended her archive for 5 more. You saw the way she worked, the way her mind connected things. You saw the patterns. You have a curator's soul. She told me so herself, in her letters." Tamsin was stunned. Lady Elspeth had written about her? "I have had my mother's rooms recreated here," he said, gesturing to a heavy oak door at the far end of the library. "Every book, every map, every piece of furniture, placed exactly as it was. I need you to walk those rooms again. Not as a maid, but as a scholar, as my partner. I need you to help me find what my mother lost." He took a step closer, the space between them crackling with unspoken intensity. "An old enemy is stirring, a rival line that believes our time is over. This knowledge is the only thing that can protect my house. Will you help me, Tamsin?" She looked at this impossible man, this creature of night and shadow, and she saw not a monster, but the same lost son she had seen 5 years ago. He was trying to protect his mother's legacy, just as she had been. Their purpose was the same, even if their worlds were impossibly different. She thought of the kindness Lady Elspeth had shown her, the trust she had placed in her. This was the final act of that promise. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and steady. "I will help you." "Would you have stayed when you learned the truth of what he was? When you realized the books you dusted were grimoires, and the history you preserved was a history of blood and shadows? Tell me in the comments, and if you are not subscribed yet, join this family." The days that followed settled into a strange and intense rhythm. Tamsin spent her hours in the recreated rooms, which were a marvel of meticulous detail. Every book was on its correct shelf, every trinket in its proper place. But now she looked at them with new eyes. She was no longer just a keeper. She was a detective, an archaeologist of memory. Lord Alaric, he insisted she call him Alaric when they were working, was her constant companion. He would sit for hours in the reading chair, watching her as she moved through the room, her brow furrowed in concentration. He never hurried her, never pushed. he simply observed, his stillness a silent, supportive presence. At first, she was intimidated. He was the Lord of Blackwood, a being of immense power, the vampire king of his entire lineage as she pieced together from the texts. But as they worked, the layers of his formidable persona began to peel away. She saw the weariness in his posture when he thought she wasn't looking. She saw the flicker of pain in his eyes when he mentioned his mother. She began to understand his world through the lens of his mother's writings. Lady Elspeth had not written of monsters. She had written of a proud, ancient race, bound by strict codes and traditions, a people who loved and grieved as deeply as any mortal, if not more so, for their attachments spanned centuries. Tamsin's methodical nature, her perfect recall of where every object belonged, proved invaluable. She would say, Lady Elspeth always placed the botany texts next to the maps of the Eastern Territories. She said the soil told a story as old as any bloodline, and Alaric, his eyes alight with understanding, would pull down a dusty tome on soil composition, and within its pages, they would find a coded annotation that led them to another clue. They were two halves of a key, fitting together to unlock the secrets of a brilliant mind. Slowly, a quiet intimacy grew between them. It was built in the small moments. One evening, as she pored over a complex celestial chart, he appeared at her elbow with a cup of steaming tea. "You have been working for hours," he said, his voice a low murmur. "Even a curator's soul requires sustenance." Another time she found a small, pressed flower, a mountain primrose, tucked within the pages of a brutal battle history. She looked up at him, a question in her eyes. A faint, sad smile touched his lips. It was her favorite. She said it proved that something beautiful could bloom in the harshest of places. His gaze lingered on Tamsin, and she felt the meaning behind his words like a physical touch. He learned her rhythms, too. He noticed the way she chewed on her lip when she was close to a breakthrough, the way she would hum softly to herself when organizing a particularly chaotic set of notes. He began to see not just the competent assistant, but the woman herself. Her quiet strength, her unwavering loyalty, her sharp, insightful mind that had been hidden away for so long. One night, Tamsin worked later than usual, chasing a thread of logic through a series of dense, coded journals. The script was tiny, the candlelight strained her eyes, and exhaustion finally claimed her. She fell asleep at the desk, her cheek pillowed on an open page. She was woken not by a sound, but by a change in the atmosphere. The ever-present chill in the room was gone, replaced by a gentle, enveloping warmth. She stirred, blinking, and realized a great weight was draped over her shoulders. It was Alaric's cloak, a heavy, magnificent thing of black wool and sable. It smelled faintly of winter air, old leather, and something else, something uniquely him. She sat up, pulling it tighter around her, and saw him standing by the window, looking out at the moonlit peaks. He hadn't woken her. He had covered her, and he had stayed. He had stood watch over her as she slept. He turned his head, his silhouette dark against the silvered glass. "Forgive me. I did not wish to disturb your rest." "You stayed," she whispered, her heart doing a strange, fluttering dance in her chest. "I did." He walked towards her, his steps silent on the thick rug. "The shadows in this house can be restless. I wanted to ensure they did not trouble you." She knew he wasn't talking about ordinary shadows. He was talking about the palpable darkness that clung to the corners of Blackwood Manor, the ancient energies of his home. He had shielded her from them, with his presence, with his own warmth. He reached the desk and gently took the journal from under her hand. His cool fingers brushed against hers, and a jolt, like lightning, shot up her arm. It wasn't unpleasant. It was startling, a sudden awareness of the life that thrummed beneath his cold skin. "You are close," he said, his voice soft, his eyes fixed on hers. "I can feel it. My mother's spirit. It answers to you." In that moment, under the weight of his cloak, with his intense gaze upon her, Tamsin felt a connection that transcended master and servant, mortal and immortal. It was a meeting of two lonely souls who had found their purpose in a shared devotion. She was no longer just the keeper of his mother's memory. She was becoming a part of his. The breakthrough came a week later. Tamsin remembered a trick of Lady Elspeth's, a fondness for palindromes and mirror writing. She held a particularly cryptic passage from a journal up to a silver hand mirror from the vanity. The reflected text was clear. It was a set of coordinates and a description of a ritual object. A locket. "The locket," Tamsin breathed, her eyes flying to the small silver heart she had been polishing on the day Alaric found her. She had packed it along with her few belongings, feeling it was a part of her mistress she couldn't leave behind. She retrieved it from her room, her hands trembling. Alaric watched, his stillness absolute, his eyes burning with an almost painful intensity. With a delicate touch, Tamsin found a hidden catch on the locket's filigree. It sprang open, revealing not a space for a portrait, but a tiny, tightly rolled piece of vellum. It was a map drawn in ink that seemed to shimmer in the candlelight. It showed a hidden chamber beneath the old family crypt, back at the estate they had left behind. And within that chamber, the text promised, lay the aegis of Volkov, a protective ward that could shield the bloodline from their rivals, the House of Corvin. A triumphant, dangerous light entered Alaric's eyes. She found it. She truly found it. But his triumph was short-lived. A sudden, violent gust of wind slammed the library windows shut, extinguishing half the candles in the room. The shadows around Alaric writhed, coiling like enraged serpents. "They know," he hissed, his face a mask of cold fury. "They have been watching. They felt the moment the locket was opened." Before Tamsin could react, the main library doors burst open. Standing there was a man she didn't recognize, dressed in the livery of a Blackwood footman. But his eyes were wrong. They were flat, predatory, and fixed on her. And behind him, several of the household guards lay slumped on the floor, clearly unconscious. "The Lord Corvin sends his regards," the man said, his voice a mocking sneer, "and he requests the company of your new little pet, the one who speaks with ghosts." The man moved with unnatural speed, but Alaric was faster. He was no longer the quiet scholar, the grieving son. In an instant, he became the vampire king. He crossed the vast library in a blink, a blur of black motion. He caught the intruder by the throat, lifting him effortlessly off the ground. The air crackled with power. Alaric's eyes were no longer stormy gray. They were blazing crimson, two burning coals in the sudden gloom. The temperature in the room plummeted, frost tracing patterns on the window panes. "You will tell your master," Alaric snarled, his voice a low, terrifying growl that was not entirely human, "that he has made a fatal error. He has trespassed in my home, and he has threatened what is mine." There was a sickening crack of bone, and the intruder went limp. Alaric dropped the body to the floor as if it were a bundle of rags. He turned to Tamsin, the crimson light in his eyes slowly receding, though the fury and the cold remained. He strode to her, his movements sharp and urgent. "You are not safe here. I will take you away, hide you where they cannot find you." Tamsin looked at the fallen man, at the terrifying power radiating from Alaric, and she felt no fear. She felt a fierce, startling wave of anger. Anger that someone would dare to violate this sanctuary. Anger that they would threaten him. And a stubborn refusal to be sidelined. She met his furious gaze with a calm fire of her own. "No," she said, her voice ringing with newfound authority. "Hiding is what I did for 5 years. I will not do it again. You said I was your partner in this. A partner does not run." He stared at her, stunned into silence by her defiance. "They think I am the key," she continued, her mind working with a swift, cold clarity. "They will come for me, so we will use that. We will set a trap, not here. We will go back." "Back?" he questioned, his voice still a low growl. "To your mother's house," she said. "To the crypt. They will expect us to go there for the Aegis. We will let them follow. We will finish this on our own terms, on hallowed ground." He looked at her, at the quiet maid who had once been terrified of his footsteps in a hallway. He saw no trace of that woman now. In her place was a strategist, a queen. She was not a liability to be protected. She was an asset, a weapon. She was magnificent. A slow, dangerous smile spread across his lips. "As you wish, my lady," he said, the title falling from his lips with perfect, sincere gravity. "We will give the House of Corvin a welcome they will never forget." The journey back was a blur of speed and darkness. They traveled by night in an unmarked carriage, Alaric's power seeming to bend the shadows around them, making them invisible to any watching eyes. They arrived at the old estate just before dawn, the house looming silent and melancholic in the gray light. This time Tamsin entered not through a cellar window, but through the front doors, held open for her by the lord of the manor himself. The house was just as they had left it, cold and shrouded, except for the one wing that pulsed with the lingering energy of her care. Their plan was simple and brutal. Tamsin, using her intimate knowledge of the crypt and its surroundings from her mistress's notes, would go to the hidden chamber. Alaric would wait in the shadows of the main mausoleum, a silent predator in his own ancestral tomb. When the Corvins made their voix frontière, he would descend. As Tamsin prepared to leave for the crypt, Alaric stopped her, his hand gently closing around her arm. The contact was cool, but it sent a shock of warmth through her entire body. "Tamsin," he said, his voice low and urgent. "There is a risk. If they reach you—" "They won't," she said, her confidence absolute. She reached up and touched his cheek, her palm warm against his cool skin. "I have the Lord of Blackwood watching over me. What could I possibly have to fear?" For a moment, he leaned into her touch, his eyes closing. The weight of centuries seemed to lift from his shoulders. He was not just fighting for his lineage anymore. He was fighting for her. She walked through the overgrown gardens towards the stone crypt, the air heavy with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. She carried a single lantern, its light a small, brave beacon in the encroaching twilight. She felt the eyes on her, the unseen watchers in the trees. She ignored them, her focus entirely on the task at hand. She entered the crypt, the heavy stone door groaning shut behind her. Inside it was cold and silent. She located the hidden catch in the floor, just as the map described, and pulled open a stone slab, revealing a dark, narrow staircase leading down. She descended into the earth, her lantern casting dancing shadows on the damp stone walls. The chamber below was small, circular, and bare, save for a stone pedestal in the center. Resting upon it was a small, ornate silver box. The aegis. She reached for it, her fingers closing around the cool metal, and then she heard them. Footsteps on the stairs above. More than one person. They were not trying to be quiet. 3 figures entered the chamber, their forms blocking the only exit. The one in the lead was a tall, aristocratic man with cruel eyes and a contemptuous sneer. Lord Corvin. "Well, well," he said, his voice smooth and venomous. "The little librarian, so helpful. You have saved us a great deal of trouble. Hand it over." Tamsin clutched the box to her chest. She lifted her chin, her gaze unwavering. "You are trespassing, my lord. This is Volkov land. You would do well to leave." Corvin laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "The Volkov line ends tonight, with its pathetic, grieving king and his new mortal pet." He took a step forward. "Give me the box, or I will take it from your cooling corpse." Suddenly, a voice echoed from the stairwell behind them, a voice like the grinding of tectonic plates, cold, ancient, and utterly furious. "That," Alaric's voice boomed, "will not be happening." Corvin and his men spun around. Alaric stood at the bottom of the stairs, a figure of pure, terrifying night. The lantern light seemed to be devoured by the darkness that clung to him. His eyes were twin crimson stars, burning with an apocalyptic rage. "You were foolish to come here," Alaric said, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "This is my land, my tomb, my power." The fight was over before it began. It was not a battle. It was an execution. Alaric moved like a phantom, a blur of violence and shadow. The screams of Corvin's men were cut short, silenced with brutal efficiency. Lord Corvin himself, ancient and powerful in his own right, was no match for Alaric's righteous fury. In the end, only Corvin and Alaric were left standing. Alaric held him by the throat, his fingers like iron bands. "My line will endure," Alaric hissed, his face inches from Corvin's. "And yours is now extinct." He ended it, swiftly, finally. Silence returned to the chamber, broken only by the soft hiss of Tamsin's lantern. Alaric stood over the fallen bodies, the fury slowly draining from him, leaving behind the profound stillness that was his nature. He turned to Tamsin, his chest rising and falling. She did not shrink from him. She walked towards him, stepping carefully over the carnage. She reached his side and placed the silver box in his hand. Then, she placed her other hand over his, her warmth covering his cold skin. "It's over," she said softly. He looked down at her, his stormy eyes searching her face for any sign of fear or revulsion. He found none. He found only strength and a deep, abiding compassion that he had not known in centuries. He had come here to reclaim a piece of his past, and instead, he had found his future. A week later, the solicitors were back. Not the greedy, dismissive ones from before, but the senior partners of the firm, summoned by a command from Lord Alaric they dared not refuse. With them were some of Alaric's distant cousins, the same ones who had whispered about Tamsin's lowly station after Lady Elspeth's death. They were all gathered in the grand drawing room of the old estate. Alaric stood before the fireplace, a commanding, intimidating figure. Tamsin stood beside him. Not behind him, not to the side, but at his shoulder. As an equal. "This estate is no longer for sale," Alaric announced, his voice ringing with authority. It is to be restored, completely. He then turned his gaze to Tamsin, a warm light in his eyes that silenced the room. Under the complete and sole direction of its new mistress. A collective gasp went through the assembled relatives. The solicitors stared, speechless. Miss Tamsin, Alaric continued, his voice softening as he spoke her name, is not only the foremost scholar on my family's history, but she is the curator of its future. She is the lady of this house, and of Blackwood Manor. Her word is my word. You will address her as such. He was looking at his cousins as he spoke, his gaze like chips of ice. The women who had once looked through Tamsin as if she were glass now stared at her with a mixture of shock, envy, and fear. The humiliation she had suffered at their hands was not just reversed, it was annihilated. They saw her now, everyone did. Later that evening, after the stunned guests had departed, Tamsin and Alaric stood in his mother's rooms, the real rooms. They were filled with candlelight, warm and alive. Is this what you truly want? She asked him quietly. To give me all this? He turned to her, taking her hands in his. Tamsin, he said, his voice thick with an emotion that spanned centuries. These are just houses, wood and stone. What I want is to give you everything. An epilogue of sorts. 5 years passed. The old estate was restored to its former glory, a beautiful, sunlit echo of the dark fortress of Blackwood. Tamsin divided her time between them, a respected scholar and the beloved lady of 2 great houses. She had brought life and warmth back not only to the buildings, but to the ancient heart of their master. One night, they sat together in the great library of Blackwood, a comfortable silence between them as they read. Tamsin was no longer a young woman. The silver was beginning to thread through her dark hair, fine lines etching the corners of her eyes. She was beautiful. Alaric watched her, his love for her a vast, aching thing in his chest. He could not bear the thought of the years stealing her from him. He put his book down and spoke her name softly. She looked up, a gentle smile on her face. There is a choice before you, my love, he said, his voice quiet and serious. A choice only you can make. Your mortal life is a precious, beautiful thing, a mayfly's dance in the sun. But my life is the long, slow turning of the stars. He rose and knelt before her chair, taking her hand in his. He was the vampire king, a being of unimaginable power, and he was kneeling to her. I would have you for all of my nights, Tamsin. I would have you for all of my centuries, if you would have them. He was not offering power. He was not offering a gift. He was offering a shared forever. He was asking. Tamsin looked into his timeless eyes, the eyes that had been the first to truly see her. She saw an eternity of nights spent in this library, of shared discoveries, of quiet companionship, of a love that had bloomed in the harshest of places. She lifted her other hand and laid it on his, the warmth of her touch against the cool, steady promise of his skin. She didn't need to speak the word. Her answer was in her eyes, in her touch, in the gentle, certain smile that lit her face. It was a quiet yes, echoing in the heart of their shared eternity. For more stories where quiet devotion conquers ancient grief, and where being overlooked becomes the source of ultimate strength, subscribe to Herb Files. So tell me, would you have stayed? Comment where you are listening from tonight. I stay up until my eyes burn to bring you these stories. If this one touched you, do not break my heart. Subscribe and I will see you in the next one.